do. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Justin Cronin, discussing his new book, The Passage, and we are just so thrilled to have him. And join me in welcoming.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here to do that. She hugged me hard and told me, no, Ida, it's different. That's not the same kind of a thing at all. You hush now and stop your crying, which I did. But even so, it didn't make no sense to me why there was a war on and there were soldiers everywhere if folks had just come down with a sniffle or something in their throat. That's what we called them, jumps. Not vampires, though you heard the word said. That's what my cousin Terrence said they were. He showed me in a comic that he had, which was a kind of picture book, as I recall. But when I asked my daddy about that and showed him the pictures, he told me no, vampires were just something in a made-up story, nice-looking men in suits and capes with good manners, and this here's real, Ida. Ain't no story about it.
First off, thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
So, first question, when did writing begin for you, and when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
That's a good question. Sometime in high school, I started writing fiction because my sister did, and I was incredibly competitive with her, to be honest. And she was very good. She was a sort of naturally fluent writer, and I'd been a reader, sort of voracious reader as a kid, starting in middle school, really. Before that, not at all. But then a kid turned me on to science fiction, basically, and sort of juvenile science fiction of Robert Heinlein, Space Cadet, and things like that. Yeah, have spacesuit and little travel. A lot of books that featured adolescent, young adolescent male protagonists having great adventures in the cosmos. So it's I sort of turned on to sci-fi at that age. And then in high school, they actually offered a class called Creative Writing. So my senior year, I did that. And that was the same time I read John Cheever for the first time, actually, which kind of told me, it was the first time I read something and I was aware that language had a sort of special power all of its own, kind of irrespective of the material almost,
Right.
And it had a sort of musical quality that was really appealing to me. I did sort of a failed musician as a kid, and I think that's sort of the on Another Star, there's a Justin who plays the piano professionally or something like that, and so that was sort of an untapped thing in me. So somewhere in high school I started doing it, but like most careers that have non-traditional pathways, meaning it's not like going to becoming a doctor and you go to med school and when it's all over you, if you survive it, you're a doctor. You just sort of, other things fall away, and maybe you have just enough success that you can justify continuing to do it, and that was sort of what happened to me. I mean, sort of I crossed the 80s, essentially, from I graduated from college in 1984, and across the balance of the 80s, I got just enough encouragement to keep going, and at some point it just became something that I had to succeed at, or I would never be happy.
Well said. You've written 2 great novels in the past, and in The Passage, you continue with your prowess of artfully weaving the tales of the characters in your story.
Oh, don't you say lovely things.
How is The Passage different from The Summer Guest and Mary and O'Neill?
Well, it's sort of overtly different in ways that would sort of be disingenuous of me not to sort of confess, which is that it's much more plot-driven, Okay. And that said, I did not want to write a novel that where the characters were just sort of baggage handlers for the plot, which I think is the trap that a lot of genre fiction and commercial fiction falls into, to be honest, and why a lot of it feels unsatisfying to me. The books that I've always loved are the ones that, and I sort of discovered this gradually, like sort of across my 30s, as I was sort of moving away from the short story with its emphasis on what you leave out towards the novel with its emphasis on what you put in. That the novels I loved the best were always the ones that had interesting and distinctive language and good characters and a really big and a plot that was just like you just had to know what was going to happen next. And there are many terrific novels like this that are extremely well regarded and yet they could be classified. They could be shelved in a bookstore as with the westerns or the war novels, right? Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove was a book that was sort of transformed me because it's just an irresistible book and beautifully written. Won the Pulitzer Prize, And another book that kind of sort of pulled me in that direction was a novel by Sebastian Faulks called Birdsong, which was a huge bestseller actually back in the 90s. I don't know if people are still reading it. They should. It's a sort of melodrama in some ways. It's a love story and a war story, but it has one of the great sort of horrible conceits of a war novel that I've ever met. It's about the guys that dug the tunnels between the trenches, right? Trying to like put explosive underneath the enemy's trench in the First World War. The worst job you've ever heard of. Like the fatality rate 100%, right? So the guys who did this are automatically heroes, just kind of, just because of that. I mean, it was all suicide all the time. It was the Suicide Channel, and so that was what I decided to do. Was I wanted to write a book, it's sort of this sort of innocent ambition, that you have when you start a book. But I wanted to write a book that really did all these things. I mean, those were kind of my models for what it is I wanted to accomplish. So in a sense, it's sort of a progression from those earlier books that were focused on character and location, setting, and sort of emotional nuances of being a human being. And then I wanted to strap my characters to kind of a runaway train, So that was the element that I added.
So, Passage is classed and shelved in the horror section in some bookstores.
Sure.
How do you feel about it being classed with a horror novel, or do you think of it that way at all?
I'm happy to see it being shelved with other horror novels, as long as it's shelved elsewhere too. Because I want people to be able to find it. And one of the things I want to do is I want to write a book that sort of operated in multiple genres. I mean, it's science fiction, it's a coming of age novel, it's David Copperfield with vampires, I'm happy to have it shelved anywhere. The idea that horror is a sort of low form, which occasionally you hear, is really not true. I mean, it's sort of our pedigree as a literary culture, American, sort of European literary culture, begins with ghost stories, begins with the macabre, begins with the gothic. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, followed by Hawthorne. I mean, it was the grand theme of early American writing is the encounter with wildness and strangeness.
Of course, you got Poe then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, so it's it's a wonderful company to be in. To call it horror is fine. But I did again want to write a book that where somebody wouldn't say, oh, that's a horror novel, I don't want to read it. I wanted them to say, oh, that's sort of, that's science fiction, I do want to read it, or that's a coming of age novel, I do want to read it, that's a novel about the American landscape, I do want to read it. So I wanted people to have a lot of different ways to attach to it.
So can you tell us a little bit about what real life personalities provided the stories for the characters in the story? Your daughter obviously played a great role in creating this story, so how will she play in with the next installments?
That's like 5 questions. So, the first question is, what real life personalities go in the book, and the answer is like everybody that I ever met. Your training as a writer happens by writing, by reading, and by being a good observer of human behavior. You don't invent people. You collage them. Like out of things you've observed, and a little bit of you is actually in every character. If you create them right, your moral sensibility is at least operating in some location within the character's psychology. It just has to be, whether or not it's to turn it on its head. I was about to use a different word, but whether or not you're inverting it, is fine. But nevertheless, your sense of morality, of human dignity, whatever, it goes into the creation of every character. So my wife, my daughter, my friends, my bosses, my colleagues, the people down the block, they all get shoveled in, and then once in a while your neighbor says to you like, hey man, put me in your book, and that's just where you needed a walk-on character who would be torn into pieces. And so there you go. There's a guy who's really pissing me in Texas because he read the book. He's like, oh man,
that's where
his entire job was to be eviscerated. So yeah, I mean you use everything. You use everybody. Obviously, my relationship with my daughter was kind of central to the book's fabrication initially, and it's one of the things the passage is it's a father-daughter novel, right? It's a father-daughter story, and models something on King Lear to kind of go high there. An apocalyptic play, really, a play about the sort of disruption of all meaningful human bonds and institutions. So yeah, she's in there. She's dispersed though among several characters as well. The character Alicia is sort of my daughter has badass, with flaming red hair.
You ready for that?
I don't know. She's 13 now. So yeah, I mean, it's, the answer to that one is unapologetically, I steal from people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much research did you do for this, and how long did it take that first draft to get done?
The first draft was 2.5 years, something like that, and then I spent a year just straight up rewriting. Although I tend to rewrite a lot as I go too. So I don't do like a draft, and that took a certain number of time, and then another draft that took a certain amount of time. So it's much more sort of choppy and hard to calculate. What was the first part of the question?
And then what sort of research?
Oh, research, yeah. Well, you do lots of different kinds. I mean, there's this sort of research of just trying to be, sort of awake and alive and pay attention to people. I view that as research. I wish I could deduct it on my income taxes. But a scene where somebody has a baby, that's because I've watched some babies be born. And you can make that one up. And then of course there's sort of technical data that you need, because there's lots of things in the book that I didn't really know anything about.
Right, there's radio stuff, you have the communications.
Yeah, radio stuff, wind turbines, how to steal a diesel locomotive. I mean, all the stuff about firearms. That was very, yeah. I mean, guns. Like just straight up. I hired a guy to go teach me everything there was to know about guns. In Texas, that takes about 5 minutes. So one phone call does the job. I had to learn about sniper rifles. Sort of long distance. 200-300 target ready for the book, the second book in the series. Then right now, so my dentist took me out to the ranch. My dentist, yeah, he's got a lease on some land in West Texas. Takes his big deer every year. So he's like, he was all about it. He was really excited. He's like, let's close the office. Let's go now. The other thing I did is I traveled every mile of the book at least once, and by car, by foot. I went to every place in the book. The geography in the book is 100% authentic, right down to the distances, the amount of time it would take to walk it. It's like it's all there. I had to change the names of a few towns just because their names were cumbersome in some way. Like everything anywhere near the Southern California desert is named Yucca something. Yeah. Right. So and I had to move a prison in Nevada. I had to pick up a prison and move it closer to the test range area where Yucca Mountain is located. But yet again, another Yucca. But the distances, the amount of time it would take, I decided I would just be really loyal to the actual geography of, in this case, principally the West. And other places in the book that are important are places that I know pretty well, that I spent some time there. Like Memphis, Tennessee. I actually lived right near the zoo. I lived bordering the zoo. And for a year, I taught at the University of Memphis, and we could hear the monkeys. And that was like the dominant impression of that whole year, was like these monkeys going crazy in their cages at night. And so, hence, the scene at the zoo. So, yeah.